There are certain towns that continue to add very poorly treated sewage. And really, I'm being charitable because when there's a major rainstorm, they simply bypass raw sewage right into the lake. That's not good. Needless to say, I think if people realized what an important water supply they have and didn't take it for granted, they'd be pretty amazed at the pollution that's going in from sources like this.
WRAL News in Raleigh reports.
Something is going on with the water at Falls Lake. Several times this summer, beaches have closed to swimmers because water tests showed something foul. Elevated levels of fecal bacteria. The problems are at Sandling Beach and the Beaver Dam swim area, both off Highway 50. Well, Beaver Dam Beach just reopened. Dan Bowens talked with county health officials today. Dan?
Pam, it doesn't sound pleasant. Of course, we've seen bacteria in Falls Lake before, but never like this. This particular strand of bacteria is known to cause digestive problems in people. The big question, why do we keep seeing it, and where is it coming from? During this summer, Beaver Dam and Sandling beaches at Falls Lake have been closed at least 3 times because of elevated levels of that bacteria. It is known to cause diarrhea in people. Most recently, red tape and caution signs were posted outside the Beaver Swim area, and the county plans to hire an independent lab to help figure this all out. At this point, though, there are no plans to shut down the beaches long term. Beaver Dam passed 2 consecutive days of tests, which is why it was reopened today. But if this trend that we've been seeing for much of the summer continues, that beach likely won't be open for very long. Okay?
Dan, thank you.
Should citizens be more conscientious about what goes down the drains, like cleaning products, pharmaceuticals, grease, that type of thing?
There's been an ongoing issue for as long as people have been cooking, probably, and have sewer systems. And we think there's been some positive changes in this regard, but there's always work to be done in terms of making sure people don't dump grease down the drain. And that can come in a lot of different ways. It's not just having a deep fat fryer that you cook a turkey in and dumping it down the drain. There's other sources of grease that you use when you're cooking steaks and things like that, hamburgers. People just dump that oil down the drain. That is an inappropriate place to put that. We ask that you put it in a can or a bottle and dispose of it in your trash can, because what that can happen is it can build up within the sewer system, and it sticks to the side of the sewer system. And there's roots that can get into the sewer system from trees. Again, it grabs grease and it eventually blocks the sewer system, and this sewer can back up and overflow. And we have what they call a sanitary sewer overflow, or an SSO. And that is a nutrient loading. That's basically raw sewage on the ground. And many times sewer lines run parallel to creeks, so there's an easy access to a water source there. So it is a all-around bad problem to have. And so we are trying to get people to make sure they do not put grease down the drain. So a lot of people have pharmaceuticals access to over-the-counter drugs and also prescribed drugs. And there's not been a lot of information out there about what to do with these drugs if you don't use the entire dose. And what ends up happening a lot of times, people just dump them down the toilet or down the sink. And that is an inappropriate way to dispose of these. These drugs should be disposed of in your trash can in a way that cannot be accessed from kids or animals or anything like that. And a lot of communities, Raleigh for one, we have a pill pickup once a year where we will take any medication, no questions asked, we'll take it and we'll dispose of it in an environmentally sensitive way. But what can happen with drugs and pharmaceuticals that are flushed down the toilet, for instance, it goes to a wastewater plant that is not particularly well equipped to treat it. Certainly some of it is treated, but perhaps some of it is not, and it can actually make its way out back into the environment. It is an important issue that please do not throw your pharmaceuticals away down the toilet or down the sink.
In your opinion, is the state, Diener and DWQ, living up to its responsibility of protecting the environment and the citizens, and why?
No, I would say that both the department as a whole and perhaps the Division of Water Quality, most concerningly, are failing to protect the state's resources and the resulting health and safe use of those resources by the public.
DWQ's mission.
To protect and enhance North Carolina's surface water and groundwater resources for the citizens of North Carolina and future generations.
They have unfortunately grown more accustomed to dealing with lobbyists for economic interests. They have often, in my conversations with them, even when they know my perspective, they refer to their clients, meaning the permit holders, that is, the ones that have been permitted for some kind of pollution, whether it's to air or land or water.
It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
And the result is they see themselves as meeting their needs. For a long time, we have felt that there was a real schism in the role that regional office that actually does the enforcement and inspections and so forth, staff played in that they were expected to provide what we call compliance assistance to permit holders instead of being regulators. And so they had sort of a vested interest in the success, if you will, of a company that is not holding them accountable, getting them getting them back to compliance as opposed to holding them accountable. And we've always felt that that should be a third party role, that the permit holder themselves should be paying for that compliance assistance, leaving the state, the taxpayer supported staff, to actually hold them accountable when pollution occurred, and to advocate in an unconflicted way for the protection of the state's resources and the public health.
The environmental agency would really, I think, do a great job, but they're so terrifically underfunded that they just can't do it. Our state needs to realize that this environmental agency deserves more funding than 1/10 of the Department of Transportation's budget. It just can't do this extremely important job of protecting fundamentally the air and the water that every citizen relies upon with such a minuscule budget. And you can pass all the great legislation you want, but if you don't have the folks there to enforce it, you have nothing.
Enforcement an issue? Are polluters penalized?
Not enough to make a difference. We say that the cost of enforcement is just another cost of doing business for industries, and in some cases we've seen essentially no enforcement being done. Back in 2000, Clean Water for North Carolina and a bunch of other clean water organizations in North Carolina submitted some enforcement horror stories, sent them to the Office of Inspector General at EPA, and got a sincerely concerned letter back. And the next year, North Carolina was one of 3 states whose water quality enforcement programs were actually studied pretty seriously by the Inspector General. And that report came out, and it agreed with essentially all of the concerns that we were raising. That is, that the economic benefit to the polluter of being out of compliance was not being compensated for by the fines that they were having to pay as a result of that noncompliance. That penalties were being assessed so long after the incident that often the agency was just sort of throwing up their hands and saying, oh, well, we waited too long, so we won't penalize you. We know in other cases where a particular penalty is challenged by a polluter, that ties up the agency enough, and they are short-staffed, that they will choose to just sort of capitulate. They've told us, some of them have told us that we put the lowest expectations in there just so that we won't risk a legal challenge. The polluter community is pretty litigious, and whether it is a permit with some provision they don't like, or even sometimes minor penalties. There was an interesting case in Western North Carolina years ago when Progress Energy, their coal-fired power plant out there, the local air quality program managed to get enforcement by demonstrating not only that they had detected excess sulfur dioxide, but that they were able to document that the company had used high sulfur coal that it was not permitted to do. The fine, as I recall, was just a few $100s, but Progress Energy made a huge case of this. They ended up paying that, but they ended up weakening overall enforcement by the agency, saying that you can't use data about what kind of coal was burned to get enforcement. So this is the kind of thing that a major polluter will do just to tie the agency's hands. And in some cases, we think it's just exercising the polluter prerogative, because we all know that a few $100s to Progress Energy would mean nothing. It's all about protecting their prerogative to do what they want and exercise control over the agency that's supposed to be regulating them. Because it's an informed citizenry that is going to hold this agency that we say has gone so far off on the wrong track accountable. And we do have the numbers. We just need to mobilize folks in order to make sure that that disproportionate impact of those economic interests doesn't retain the control over the agency that it now has.
Some of the high-ranking officials of DENR are now working for major polluters. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, it's not just high-ranking ones, but I'll start with the high-ranking ones. A former division of water quality head, Tommy Carr, went to work immediately after retiring from his position with the hog industry. Preston Howard, who is now executive director and lead lobbyist for the Manufacturing and Chemical Industry Council, was a former high-ranking official at DENR. And others have gone to Duke Energy and other similar, where we see that they have been sort of trained and gotten their environmental regulatory expertise at taxpayer expense, but they're offered jobs typically that can pay 2, 3, 4 times or more as much as they would earn in the public agency. We've also seen this at lower levels. We've seen regional office staff and permit writers who have, in fact, gone straight from their positions to higher paid positions in an industry that they were just regulating in the agency. There's nothing, some states like Massachusetts have laws that prevent legislators and public officials from serving in a sort of conflicted position immediately afterwards, so that there's not this ongoing seduction that we see in North Carolina to go from the public sector to a better paid private sector job. But we have nothing like that in North Carolina.
Whose interests are most often protected?
Well, unfortunately, because money does talk very loudly, and that takes the form both of campaign donations by industry and economic interests to legislators who are not supposed to be involved in the regulatory process, but almost everyone who's honest at the regulatory agencies will tell you that those legislators speak loudly, and they typically speak without detailed overall information or a strong environmental background. They'll speak on behalf of an economic interest, just with the argument of jobs, whether or not it's the case that more regulation would present an economic problem for that industry. They'll speak on behalf of that industry being weakly regulated. So that happens. In addition, there are actually lobbyists that are working in the agency to continue to keep pressure on regulators to keep permits weak, to keep standards from being strengthened. And in many cases, they will advocate strongly for stakeholder processes, which have a real serious downside. That is because the public doesn't have the capacity or the resources to be able to take time off from work and participate. Advocacy groups that are trying to protect the environment are at a serious disadvantage. Citizens don't have the time to participate in those processes. So the ones that do have the resources to participate are the industries that have the resources to hire their lobbyists to be present. And the result is that the trend is for stakeholder processes to continue to weaken regulations with time. So, they can advocate for a stakeholder process, and then they can dominate the stakeholder process in a way that prevents strong regulations and permits from being put in place.
We already had a requirement that Department of Environment and Natural Resources come up with rules to deal with nutrients, which is a major pollutant. but we also addressed sediment this summer, which was an important step forward for the lake.
Durham is successfully fighting the Falls Lake rules. Steve Levitas is negotiating with Diener officials to weaken the rules.
The most important thing is that Falls Lake is polluted now. We've known it. It's been polluted. The first law to direct the Environmental Management Commission to come up with rules to deal with nutrients was back in 2005. And there were studies in the 90s and early 2000s that pointed out to the water quality problems with the lake. So we've known this is a problem for a while. And the longer we go without strong rules that change the way we live above the lake, then the water's just going to get worse. And we can't survive as a community with a polluted drinking water source.
It can't just be one town that is downstream or another town that might try to do the right thing. Everybody needs to pitch in this issue, and everybody needs to do everything they can to turn this situation around. When you think about it, I really think that we as Americans and we as North Carolinians, surely we know better than this. This is the most important public water supply depended upon by men, women, and children, 500,000 of us. Why is it on the state's list of degraded waters? How did we let it get to this point? We really need to turn it around.
The word rival, the origin of the word rival comes from people who share the same river. And that is the biggest problem, is that we've got communities above the dam that their activities flow into the dam. Communities below the dam, like Raleigh, which I represent, drink that water. And so there's an inherent tension where we are asking of Durham County, Granville County, Person County, to make changes to how they've done business in the past in order to improve water they don't drink. It's water that people in Wake County drink. And that is an inherent tension. But what has been encouraging is that my colleagues in the Senate in these other jurisdictions understand that our fates are really tied. Durham and Granville and Person, for 30, 40, 50 years down the road, they will not succeed if there's not a vibrant and healthy Wake County. They need Wake County just like Wake County needs them. And so we all have a stake in taking strong action today to improve the water quality that we depend on.
Yeah, I think the regional approach is the only thing that's going to be successful in the long run. And it's, one community can't do it alone. Raleigh can't do it by itself. Durham can't do it by itself. These communities share a river, and they need to collaborate on protecting its quality and its quantity.
This is a priority because this is our future, this is our current drinking water, and it is our future drinking water. But it's really vital that the citizen voice be heard because the fact of the matter is it is the citizens who are going to be drinking this water. The decisions that are being made about how we're protecting our water or not protecting our water, who's in the room? And it's usually not the citizens who are in the room. It's the folks who have a financial interest in the building industry, in the home building industry, and who have resisted change, which is a shame because, as we know, the scientists at NC State tell us there is so much technology we can use right now that's not even complicated to protect our drinking water. And this is what the citizens should be demanding. We can still build, we can even develop, but we have to do it in the right way. Because if we don't, we're all going to pay the price.
So how do we fix these problems? What's the solution to all of this?
Well, water conservation and water supply are two issues that even that folks across the board should be and are being very concerned about. There was an article in North Carolina Business a few years back that talked about the need for North Carolina to start to pay a lot more attention to its water supply and the quality of the water. And that's because Raleigh is one of the worst areas potentially for running out of water in the southeast after Atlanta. And Raleigh really needs to do a lot more to pay attention to that issue. Unfortunately, what we as people tend to do is we react to crisis. That's not a wise idea here because crises can build quickly with water supply issues. And all it takes is 1 or 2 years of an extremely serious drought for a lot of misery and a lot of damage to occur. So we really need to pay attention to the issue and be proactive about taking better care, better concern of how we use water, of paying more for it, of valuing it more.
Well, water conservation is very important because studies have shown that the community on the East Coast that is most at risk of running out of water in the future after Atlanta is the Raleigh area. So we have to be concerned about water quality. It means we have to think about water in a different way. It cannot be considered this unending resource that we just turn on the spigot, let the water run forever, and we never think about it anymore. So I think that one way you change the way you think about a resource is how it's priced. I'm encouraged that the city of Raleigh is changing the way they're going to price it as a utility so that you're not actually rewarded with a lower rate the more that you consume. It's counterintuitive the way it should be. So it's just something that we as a community are going to have to confront head on.
Really need to move away from using treated drinking water for lawn irrigation. Why not capture rainwater and stormwater and use that for lawn irrigation and other non-potable purposes? And that way we could reduce our stormwater pollution and reduce the strain on our drinking water supplies like Paul's Lake. I think is in the future, 20 years from now, water is going to be more valuable. People's willingness to pay is going to be greater because there are going to be fewer places to get water. So what we might think now is too expensive a technology to invest in to, say, treat stormwater, it may seem very affordable 20 years from now. For a couple reasons, water will be more valuable, technology will be better, it'll be more cost effective. And with the rapid population growth we're having in this region, I think we need to have a debate about where those people are going to live. And we know it doesn't make sense for to have a huge population growth in our water supply watersheds. I mean, you can't have the growth without the water, so why would you let the growth go in and reduce the quality and quantity of your water supplies? It makes a lot more sense to provide incentives for people to live near transportation corridors, so you can get to your jobs, you can get to school, get to work, get to the daycare. It makes a lot more sense for us to focus our growth in these transportation corridors, redevelop our cities, and discourage development in our drinking water supplies.